Through 2 weeks of college football, nobody is more deserving of the Heisman than Jonah Coleman.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that may be, please make sure you click that subscribe button, click the little bell as well, so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio-only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the channel out a lot. Now, I want to have some fun here because Washington had a lot of fun on the field on Saturday as they just absolutely routed UC Davis 70-10. I want to talk about some other standouts from that game, guys like Alex McLaughlin, Jacob Lane, who really did pop to me at least. I also want to talk about Demond Williams. I wanted to just make sure I expanded a little bit. Some everydayers had some very nice things to say about him as well, and I want to make sure I touched on a lot of that. But through 2 weeks of college football, as I'm sitting here right now, after watching Jonah Coleman go for 5 touchdowns on just 16 touches last night against UC Davis. Yes, it was UC Davis, but there is nobody in college football right now who is more deserving of the Heisman Trophy. Let's get into some of the, the basic numbers, if you will. Jonah Coleman has the most touchdowns, rushing or receiving, in the nation with 7. Nobody else has more than 5. He's number 3 in the country in rushing yards with 288. He's averaging 7.38 yards per carry. He is also number 3 in the nation in scrimmage yards with 334, averaging 8.1 yards per touch. This is a guy who has been so tremendously efficient every single time he touches the football, no matter where that might be, a pass, a run. He's been awesome in pass protection as well when you just really get into it, and he has just given Demond Williams clean pockets time in and time out. I know that doesn't, necessarily go into Heisman voting, but there's something to be said for, it really is just an MVP award of college football, and those are things that Jonah Coleman has done throughout his career that got him on the field early at Arizona, that he continues to show what just makes him such an effective player for Washington and why he has been the most important piece of this offense throughout the early part of the year. Yes, it was Colorado State and it was UC Davis, but Jonah Coleman has shown elite just ability at every aspect of the game. His wiggle in tight spaces is just truly incredible. The burst and the top end speed that he's been able to just find in himself after just completely remaking his body over the offseason, cutting over 2% of his body fat and adding more muscle to his frame has certainly made him more explosive. It's made him faster. It's made him stronger. And I've just been so impressed with everything he brings to the table from that standard. Then you look at the off field a little bit, just to give a quick note there. Jedd Fisch gave him a shout out during his post-game press conference on Saturday, saying that Jonah Coleman also has the highest cumulative team GPA on the roster from his first year at 3.91. And they gave him an academic all-star award or something like that. And that's certainly something that, again, might not factor into Heisman voting, but certainly doesn't hurt to boost your resume either. And on top of that, before we get back to Jonah, one thing that I think is really important to note on top of all of this is this has not been, like the MVP in the NFL, the Heisman usually just goes to the best or the quarterback with the most stats. And as you kind of look around the nation, there aren't a lot of quarterbacks that stand out in that category. Like I look at a guy like Sawyer Robertson at Baylor, who's been really solid in terms of the numbers, but the early season loss to Auburn on his schedule is something that certainly might hurt him in the long run. Let's see what that looks like in the Big 12 as that schedule moves forward. And then, it also just a lot of times will go to the best performing player on the best team. And you look at somebody like LSU, who Garrett Nussmeier looked solid against Clemson in that early season win. And then he looked okay against Louisiana Tech in a 23-7 win for them on Saturday, but his numbers aren't necessarily, eye-popping in that game. He threw for 237 yards with a touchdown and an interception in a 23-7 victory. So, again, the numbers are okay, but they're not necessarily eye-popping. And, again, Louisiana Tech, yes, Colorado State and UC Davis, but you can only play who's in front of you. And as I look at Jonah Coleman, everything he brings to the table is certainly going to translate over into Big Ten play because we saw him do it last season. He has been the catalyst for an offense that has been absolutely resurgent. They've gained over 1,100 yards in 2 games, and all of that is because of what Jonah Coleman brings to the table. And having Damon Williams in the backfield so they can run this read option time and again is certainly very helpful. But whenever you just look at opposing defenses, they just key in on number one. That is absolutely their priority on every single play. And the more that you look at what he can do this season, I think that Washington certainly has an opportunity to be 8-4, 9-3. If a couple things bounce the right way, maybe they can wind up at 10-2. These all certainly just seem to be within the realistic realm of outcomes for Washington, especially as you look at their schedule and you look around the Big Ten, where next up is Washington State after bye week. That's their final non-conference game, and then Ohio State comes to town. But then you look at what it looks like after that. It's Maryland, it's Rutgers, and then you have a couple of tough prove-it games at Michigan. Illinois comes to town. Purdue is then up on the schedule too, before UCLA and Oregon as well. So there are a lot of opportunities for Jonah Coleman to continue to just add to his stats against a bunch of middle of the road to lower, division, or if we even want to call it that, in the Big Ten, where you look at UCLA, that's a team that just lost to UNLV. I know that's late in the season, but if you can get to Jonah Coleman already has 1,000 yards going into that game, and you can continue to just, add to his stats a little bit. He scores 2 or 3 touchdowns in that game. I really do feel like that's a big reason that Jonah stayed in this game against UC Davis as long as he did, because it was something that we've talked a lot about on this show over the course of the summer, that Jedd Fisch knows how to market his guys and how to just put them out in front, whether it be, in Jonah's case, the Doak Walker Award, the Maxwell Award, maybe even the Heisman Trophy. We just got the player wrong. Or throughout the offseason, it was, hey, how is he going to pad Damon Williams' stats? What is that going to look like? But now it's very clear that Jedd Fisch has a plan to just help Jonah Coleman achieve the most in his final year of eligibility, and rightfully so. He deserves it. When you go and you read his backstory of where he came from, how he got to where he is now, it's all really wonderful. And Jonah is one of the nicest, most respectful guys that I've been able to cover in my 5 years of just covering UW football. It's just so wonderful to talk to him every single time. And again, are these things that will win you the Heisman Trophy? No. But when you are performing at such a high level on the field and you're able to just back it up with a really well-rounded personality and grade point average and all of these other things off the field as the leader that he is, these are things that people in the national media need to take notice of when you're talking about Washington, because we know what kind of talent Jonah Coleman is on the field. We do. And I think he's going to continue to show that. And I think there are certainly going to be benchmarks that he might have to hit as a running back. Obviously, when we look at what Ashton Jeanty did last season, and he still lost out on the Heisman to Travis Hunter, who certainly is a very talented player. Personally, I would have voted for Ashton Jeanty if, we're just calling a spade here. But I just look at what Jonah Coleman brings to the table. And one of my hot takes of the offseason was that with Washington's exciting just backfield of Damon Williams getting carries, Adam Muhammad, who looked awesome in the UC Davis game, taking 14 carries for 95 yards and a touchdown, plus what Jordan Washington brings to the table as well. You look at what all of those guys do and what all of them bring to the table. I thought, okay, it's a way to save Jonah Coleman's legs a little bit and still give him 20, 25, maybe even 30 touches in some of these big games, Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan, what have you. But I think it's very clear that the plan is to just ride Jonah Coleman into the ground and still spell him with these other guys, still let Damon Williams get his carries in, especially on some of these scrambles. But Jonah has been the focal point of this offense since really the middle of last season at Arizona, in 2023 at Arizona, when you go back and just dive into the film of Jedd Fisch's teams, even with Tyrone McMillan. Jonah Coleman was the one who opened up so many lanes and just gave him single coverage opportunities where he won time and time again in 2023. And then coming to Washington in 2024, getting to 1,000 yards, getting to 10 touchdowns. It was so clear that Washington wanted to establish the run. But with the way the offensive line looked last season, there was never really going to be a chance to get that. A fun stat that was thrown out there by shout out to Death Row KP for this one, where Washington had 14 rushing touchdowns all of last season in 13 games. Through 2, you've got 12 this season already. So a lot of that is because of what Jonah Coleman brings to the table and everything that he does. And if he can continue to do this after the bye week against Washington State, against Ohio State, and just continue to chip away at some of these numbers that he needs to hit on that side, plus everything else that he brings to the table from an off-field perspective, Jonah Coleman absolutely deserves the Heisman Trophy, and I'd really like to see him get an invitation to New York at the very least, depending on how this season goes. But let's switch gears here, because another guy that Jedd Fisch has said he wants to see in New York City one day is Demond Williams, who just continues to impress. But we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Supply House. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with Supply House. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. Need parts for a project fast? Supply House has next day delivery. Talk about a game changer. The part finder tools and 3D schematics can save you hours on jobs where every detail matters. Join their free Trade Master program today and score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use promo code SHCollege5 for 5% off your first order. That's Supply House, real people, real service. We've also got a message from our good friends over at Game Time. College football is back, and I couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real, actually getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. I pulled up Game Time, and in just a couple of taps, I saw amazing deals. I'm talking about your favorite college football games for as low as $25. The app makes it super simple. You can even see the exact view from your seat before buying. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. When you look at Demond Williams' numbers for the entirety of the 2025 season, I don't think they're going to turn any heads. Middle of the road in the Big Ten right now. He's completed 69.4% of his passes for 480 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's 7th in the conference. And that's, coming off a performance where he had 254 yards and a touchdown against UC Davis. Plus, he added 64 yards and a score on the ground. And by the way, that 64% completion percentage that he had in that game was actually the lowest of his 4 starts in his career. Just an interesting note in there. But, we look at these numbers and then adding in the rushing for the season through the 2 games, it's 132 yards plus the touchdown he scored on Saturday night. I couldn't be more impressed with what we've seen from Demond Williams early on. I know there are people who, and I'm one of them truly, who want to see him slide a little bit more and make sure he's protecting his body and not take big hits. But at the same point, I was having this conversation with several of our wonderful colleagues up in the booth on Saturday night in the press box, where we said, yeah, you certainly want to make sure you do that. And I'm sure Jedd Fisch and Jimmy Doherty gets very nervous every time he gets in the open field and is trying to shake guys and make them miss. But at the same point, these are the things that make him one of the most, if not the most exciting quarterbacks in this conference. I look at what Demond Williams brings to the table, and I just get so excited every time he drops back to throw or he rolls out and it's time to run, because he just is a truly electrifying playmaker. Everything he does is so much fun to watch. And it's not, you can look at several quarterbacks, like with Sunday Night Football today, with Josh Allen at Wyoming being a perfect example of somebody who very clearly has all the traits and all the talent in the world, but you don't know what's going on, and you don't have any idea where the ball is going, if it's going to be accurate, anything like that. Or, again, talking about his days at Wyoming, not trying to disrespect the NFL MVP here, but when you look at Demond Williams, it is very clear that even before he got to Washington, because these are things he showed as a true freshman during spring practice in 2024, the poise is there. The football IQ is there. The pinpoint accuracy. He can make throws to all 3 levels of the field. Everything he does is already so impressive and so advanced. And that was one of the things that I think Jedd Fisch glommed onto early on, and what got him, to commit at Arizona was these are all things that just work so well in this offense too, which is, why I've been so big throughout the spring and the summer and into fall camp saying this is a guy who can be a top 3, top 5 quarterback in this conference and truly in the country by the time his junior and senior years roll around, because he just has all of the talent in the world to make plays however you see fit. And that's exactly what we've seen from him so far this season. Like, you go back and you watch the UC Davis game again. And yes, he had a lot of time to throw. That pass rush was not getting home. They were not getting through this offensive line for the most part. But even, when they were, after 4, 5, 6 seconds of sitting back there and going through his reads, and the Aggies playing solid coverage on the back end, because their secondary is one of the better ones in the FCS, and still just finding ways to sit in zones and not giving him big windows to throw, he found ways to extend plays with his legs. And I think about the 3rd and 9 throw to Dezmen Roebuck over the middle of the field, where he just did a great job being patient and going through his reads. And I think for a lot of players making their 4th career start, that's not something you're going to see very often. And it's one of the things that makes Demond such a just strong and competent quarterback at this point in his career. And it's what led Jedd Fisch to throw him out there as a true freshman in all 13 games last season. The fact that he doesn't have to worry about him making bad decisions, making dumb throws, where I think that he still needs to continue to just figure out when to throw the ball away and when not to. But when you look at just the entirety of even going back to last season and factoring in just some of the different plays that he had at different points then, you just see somebody who is very clearly on the path to being one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten. And I couldn't be more excited about where he's going, even if the numbers aren't there yet, because like I was just talking about to open the show, you have arguably the nation's best running back right now, and nation's best player, excuse me. Let's just call it what it is, in Jonah Coleman. So when you have a guy like this who is just, essentially playing second fiddle, even though he is the quarterback and everything, to such a obvious superstar in Jonah Coleman, there's so many areas that he's going to continue growing at, and what his baseline is right now is already so high compared to so many other quarterbacks that you can turn on and watch in the Big Ten on a week in, week out basis. I'm not going to just, call anybody out and throw anybody under the bus here, especially when some players that I believe Demond is better than have better numbers than him right now. But you just look at what Demond Williams brings to the table, and his football IQ and the mental side of things is so important. And I think one thing that you have to give a shout out to in that department is Will Rogers. Will Rogers last season, whenever Jedd Fisch was asked about him, whenever Will talked about Demond, or whenever we spoke to Demond at different points last season, one thing that he would always do was give credit to Will Rogers, saying, he showed me a lot about watching film. He showed me a lot about preparation, whether it be as a backup or a starter. Prepare for every game like you are the starter. There are so many different things that Will Rogers did to help Demond Williams continue to come along on the mental side of his game. And as you continue to watch him grow this season, whether it be against Washington State, Ohio State, Maryland, just naming the next 3 games there, as he continues to just figure out not just who he is as a quarterback, because I think he already knows what kind of player he is, but just figures out what his limitations are, what he can do, what he can't do, what he can get away with as he starts to get into this Big Ten schedule. Obviously it's starting out on the toughest note possible with the number 1 team in the country. But as Demond Williams continues to figure out who he is in this conference and what he actually can do, I'm just so excited for what his future holds, because even if the numbers continue as they are, just for the rest of the season, let's just say he averages 1.5 touchdown passes per game for 240 yards through the air, and he's at 69.4 right now. Let's say he just stays at that number for the rest of the year. That is clearly someone who is on the path to stardom when you look at what this offense is and how it's designed for him, because the way when he rolls out and he just sees open space, the way he just attacks that and just quickly just sees, okay, yeah, even if there is, somebody open, I don't want to have to take time to set my feet and make the throw when I know I can pick up 8, 9, 10, 11 yards every single play, where he's averaging 6.29 yards per carry right now. But when you go back and you look at it, when you take sacks out of that number is much higher, because he got sacked 2 or 3 times against Colorado State in the opener. So this is a guy who is just easily able to move the chains with his legs. And as he continues to grow, I really do believe that the ceiling is limitless for what this player can achieve. I saw Dick Fane put it out there, Seattle radio host, that if he were 6'1", he would be the number 1 overall pick in the 2027 NFL draft. And I believe that he has first round potential no matter what his size is. And I don't want to, go out there and put unreasonable expectations on him and say, yeah, that kid's going to be the first overall pick in a couple of years, because that's unfair to literally any player. But as you continue to watch Demond Williams, just take a second to, before you want to yell at him saying, oh, why isn't he throwing the ball? What's going on? Recognize his patience. Recognize some of the other things that he's doing when maybe there isn't somebody open downfield, especially if you're not able to come to the stadium to watch a game, which highly recommend you do, by the way, because there are so many just incredibly fun opponents coming to Husky Stadium this season. But just watch how Demond Williams processes defenses and how much he has learned from his freshman year to his sophomore year, because this is a kid who very clearly understands everything that's going on the field at any given time. He doesn't panic. He's not making bad decisions with his arm or with his legs. As long as he's able to get down and slide and get out of bounds a little bit more often, there is absolutely no reason, with everything that he has shown through the first 2 games of the season, that by the time this year is all said and done, that he is not a top 3 quarterback in this conference. And I'm so excited about what he brings to the table, but he's also got a pretty strong supporting cast around him. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at the Game Cap. Quick question for all you college football fans out there. If you could go back in time and sit front row at your school's biggest rivalry game, what hat would you be wearing? Yes, I said hat. For me, it would be the Game. These aren't just hats. They're the same vintage styles fans wore back in the 80s and 90s. And guess what? They still go for the same price they did back then. When you use code LOCKEDON, you'll get your vintage hat for $16.99. Head to thegamecaps.com and check out all their awesome styles, especially for UW. I'm a big fan of vintage looks, and their vintage looks for UW is just absolutely incredible. You can grab your team's classic bar or retro circle design and use code LOCKEDON for an exclusive discount, because legends wear the Game. Of course, no mention of just other standouts from this win over UC Davis would be complete without talking about Denzel Boston. 5 catches, 52 yards is a really solid day for just him, as he, didn't really need to do that much in this game. But then he goes out and he adds a 78-yard punt return. And this is something that I've heard from a lot of everydayers, from friends of mine, fans, everybody, truly, who've just asked several questions about why Denzel Boston was returning punts. And Jedd Fisch has always said that he wanted someone who he knew he could rely on, talked a lot about his ability to track the ball as something that was very important, and then his explosiveness to be able to get upfield. And that's exactly what he did in this game. Also, shout out to Jonah Coleman, by the way, who, when he and Denzel were the 2 players that we got a chance to talk to after the game on Saturday night. And one of the first things that he proudly came in and proclaimed was, hey, I called that Denzel punt return. And Denzel just kind of just confirmed. He's like, yeah, he definitely did. And shout out to Denzel, who's going to be apparently buying gift cards for dinners for all of his blockers who were in on that play. So pretty cool for him. But I just kind of look at Denzel as a punt returner. I'm not going to go out and predict we're going to see another punt return touchdown this season, but seeing him do that in this game was really important for just the season going forward, because now that somebody who, I think if you go back and you look at the numbers from last season, he fair caught somewhere between 80 and 90% of his punt returns, is just knowing that he has the ability to take one back to the house just in his arsenal is really exciting for not just for Washington fans, but it's also a nice thought for, just Washington special teams, where maybe they're going to try to, just opposing teams are going to try to keep the ball away from him a little bit more often as we move forward in the season, which could lead to a couple of bad punts and maybe some solid field position for the Huskies moving forward. So it's something to keep an eye on there, because while Denzel didn't really need to do much in this game, Washington's true freshman receivers did. We saw shout out to Justice Williams and Chris Lawson, who both made their first career catches, while Raiden Weisbreit did as well. He made a couple as he got his second start of the year, and he looked really solid. I loved seeing him connect with Demond Williams on that deep corner route for 45 yards early in the game, as I think that this is something where, especially if Rasheed Williams misses an extended period of time, seeing Omari Evans and Raiden Weisbreit on the same side of the field is a really enticing thought for Jedd Fisch. And I feel like this is something that might have already been in the plans, even if Omari didn't get hurt and have to miss the first 2 weeks, because both those guys give you such great speed on the outside. Omari, one of the things that he was certainly brought in here to do was to be able to stretch the field and give you the ability to take the top off the defense. And with somebody like Raiden, who can certainly do that as well, having a guy like that underneath who can work at all 3 levels of the field and just already has a little bit more chemistry with Demond Williams, because the two of them just go way back to just knowing each other from Arizona and high school and youth football and everything like that. I think that's very important. And the same can be said for Dezmen Roebuck, who was the guy who I didn't really expect to play this year. I'll be completely honest, where I thought that it had nothing to do with his talent, but coming in June, it is just so hard to make an impact. And then the injury to Chris Lawson really did open a door for him. And when we asked Jedd Fisch a few weeks ago why Raiden Vinesbright got to start, one of the things that, or over Omari Evans, one of the things that Jedd told us was that it was every time his number was called, he found a way to make a play. And you can say the exact same thing about Dezmen Roebuck. Every single day on this show after practice, it was, hey, Dezmen Roebuck made another great catch. He's doing so much impressive stuff in the open field with the ball in his hands. He's just such a secure pass catcher. Anything you wanted to say about him, he did on a day in, day out basis. I highlighted it in the last segment, that 16-yarder from Demond Williams to Dezmen, where he just sat down in the middle of the field, found a soft spot in the zone. It goes back to that chemistry and knowing each other. And that's one thing that Dezmen did really well down at Marana High School in Arizona. And one thing he's continuing to do well here at Washington is just find soft spots, find ways to get open, however that might be. He's a really solid route runner. You saw him create separation last week against Colorado State. You saw him do it again this week against UC Davis, but he's also a playmaker with the ball in his hands and with open space. And it's really exciting to think about because I know I highlighted this on my reaction show as well, but it's worth mentioning again because it really is that important that this is a testament to Senior Director of Player Personnel, Matt Doherty, and Washington's entire scouting department, because this is something where Kevin Cummings and Jedd Fisch both talked about it during fall camp as well, that this was a guy who, in Dezmen Roebuck, who didn't go to the biggest high school in Arizona and certainly got a little overlooked on the recruiting trail. But every time he came on campus in Tucson for a 7-on-7 event or anything like that, he was the first guy who was just making plays on a drive-in, drive-out basis where all of the coaches were just kind of like, whoa, who is this guy? And how do we get him on our team? So this is something that they had been monitoring for a very, very long time. And again, it's a credit to just the talent evaluation. Talent can come from all over the place. It doesn't matter the star ranking. And seeing a guy like that succeed is just so awesome. And it's so exciting to think about what he can continue to be in this offense, because as you kind of look down the line, this is something that I know I've harped on a lot when it comes to the wide receiver depth, especially, again, considering how much time Rasheed Williams might miss. As we look into 2026, there are going to be 2 starting spots up for grabs. I think Chris Lawson, who will play a little bit in the game, is going to be a competitor for one of those spots. Dezmen Roebuck certainly will be. Justice Williams, who again made his first career catch in this game, certainly will be. And I think Raiden Vinesbright is going to be that mix as well. I feel like he might wind up locking down one of those spots since he's got that experience under his belt already this season. But as I look at what this wide receiver core can be going forward, Washington has so many playmakers, and it's a really exciting thought to think about, because this is the thing. When you go out and you sign 5 wide receivers in a class, I think it's just more a matter of, okay, we like all these guys. Which ones are going to step up and break out and contribute early? And that's exactly what we've seen from Raiden, from Dezmen Roebuck, and to an extent, Chris Lawson as well. So I'm really excited about where that group is going. But before we get out of here, there are a couple other shout outs that I want to make. One of them is to the offensive line. 628 yards of offense is the most in the Jedd Fisch-era, not a surprise there, by over 100 yards. Washington had set the record, if you will, for the most yards in the Jedd Fisch-era last week against Colorado State with 509. And then they just go out and blow that out of the water against UC Davis. And this is something where, again, I mentioned the offensive line a little bit earlier on in the show because it's very important when talking about Jonah Coleman and Demond Williams. But when you look at what this unit has gone through, especially when you look at last season, allowing a Big Ten worst 39 sacks, coming to where they are this year. Yeah, they allowed a few in week 1, but they still plowed the way for 283 yards on the ground last week, 320 plus this week. This is a really, really solid unit. Seeing a more 50-50 split between Paki Finau and John Mills was pretty interesting. Probably had a little bit to do with the game script, but getting both those guys in is like at wide receiver. Just, it shows how much talent that Washington's coaching staff believes it has at the position, and they want to find ways to get all of these guys on the field. Seeing Champ Faleolea get into the game was awesome. But again, over 300 yards on the ground, over 300 yards in the air too. This is a really strong unit. And I don't necessarily know if it's going to be, by the end of the season, an elite one in the Big Ten, but seeing the growth from last year to this year is so significant and so noticeable. And it's also really exciting to think about, because look at the step that Drew Esapardi has taken. Carver Willis has come in and been a really sturdy left tackle and has been a great leader for this team. Landon Hatchett has stepped in after, just trying to get healthy last season and not necessarily being at full strength. He has been an awesome leader for this unit as well. And combining that with young talent, again, Taleolea, Mills, Finau, all of these guys, plus we've talked about what's coming down the pipeline in a guy like Cody Green as well. There is so much exciting young talent on this offensive line. And if they can continue to gel and just, again, make marginal improvements, just doesn't seem like enough anymore when we just see what this line has looked like through the first couple of games. If they can continue to take a step forward, they're going to be a driving force for this offense and for all these guys that we've talked about moving forward, because there's just so much talent in this unit. And again, it goes back to the recruiting. And it's been such a testament to Jedd Fisch's entire coaching staff for being able to put this unit together in less than 2 years, where, yes, it's nice when you have a few anchors in Pocky Finau, a holdover from the Kalen DeBoer staff, and the same with Landon Hatchett, and Drew as a party as well, who's someone who committed to the DeBoer staff out of the portal and then stayed on when Jedd Fisch and company got to town. But it's just such a nice testament to what all these guys bring to the table and what this coaching staff, whether it be Brennan Carroll last season, now Michael Switzer, have done to help overhaul this unit. There's so much to be excited about in that group, and I think we're going to see more and more of that as we get into Big Ten play. Last but not least, we've got to talk about these starting outside linebackers. Jacob Lane and Zach Durfee turned in strong performances, obviously a pair of sacks. Jacob Lane had the one that really set the tone on the very first play of the game, and Zach Durfee racked up the backup quarterback in the third quarter. But you look at it, they had 5 pressures between the two of them, according to Pro Football Focus. And shout out to Isaiah Ward. He deserves to be lumped into this as well, because he also had a sack in the first quarter on Caden Pinnock. But I feel like this unit certainly heard the criticism that was thrown their way throughout the week. I know I saw it from a lot of everydayers in the comments that this group needed to be better, especially against the run. But you take out that 35-yard run where that running back did a really nice job of bouncing outside. This unit had a very, very solid week. They did exactly what they were supposed to against an inferior opponent. They opposed their will, their physicality, their strength, their size, all of that. They did a great job collapsing the pocket and making life tough on these opposing quarterbacks, since 4 players ended up throwing a pass in this game for UC Davis. But this is something that needs to continue. It's one of those things where I said it a lot on the reaction show, and I need to keep making sure that I emphasize this. You did a great job against UC Davis, but yes, it was an FCS opponent. So as we look forward and as we look down the line to Washington State in a couple of weeks, you need to continue that performance against a slightly better group of talents. And then, of course, there's the big one coming down the pipeline a couple weeks after that. So I look at this unit of outside linebackers, and I think that the talent is there. The scheme is certainly there to help these guys succeed and win in one-on-one matchups. We saw that start to come to fruition in this game, but that needs to continue on a week-in, week-out basis. And if they continue to not only rush the passer and collapse the pocket, but be strong against the run, this defensive line is certainly set to take a step forward. But that's all I got for all you everydayers out there today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. And if you like what we have to offer, please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comments section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday.